Hey, Eamon, how you doing?
Good, Andrew. How are you?
Good. A bit quiet in here because the AC's off, and all I can hear where you are is the occasional bird. So,
Yeah, it's a little bit darker here at the moment, so I'm not sure. I think we're kind of back into summer, perhaps. So anyway, how you getting on?
yeah, good, good. So good. So, welcome everyone that's listening, everyone that's watching. See a few people dropping in here. Good to have you back. We are on the as much as the summer isn't over, our summer series is over, right? As far as kind of what we've been running through over the last 6, 7 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 6 weeks is seventh week today. It's been good actually. It's been some great feedback on that. I think I think some of those sort of tactical elements have been appreciated. I think we had some good feedback from people who've gone away and tried stuff, and then they've come back with a couple of questions. Um, but yeah, actually, I mean, in all fairness, I think today's show is based on people who've been watching over those last few weeks, and are perhaps a little bit kind of confused as to where they should be beginning now in terms of new businesses
Yeah.
and new ventures that they're involved in. So yeah, looking forward to today. I think we may have bitten off slightly more than what we can chew. Bearing in mind, we're going to try and cover um, really what takes us about maybe 6 hours if we're building out two strategies,
Yeah.
or high level strategies in the space of 45 minutes. But yeah, it
So,
was exciting. It was exciting when we decided to do it.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. It was quite fun. We were thinking of it. I guess it's like those home makeovers, right? I'm currently Lauren. What's his name? Lawrence Bowling or something. The one with all the hair.
Oh yeah,
I can't
okay,
remember that
yeah.
guy. But no, I think it's doable. As you said, what we're working on here, guys, is kind of two high level strategies of a couple of clients we've met. They've agreed to kind of have this build out. So we're kind of going to take over the screen for those of you listening on the podcast, and we've got a lot of people listening to the podcast. We'll provide the screen recording as well. So I think it'll be good to share the screen recording for people, so you can see like a snapshot of what the mind map ultimately looks like, because that's what we're going to go through. We're going to kind of build out a mind map, and we find this works really well with clients as well. So as always, feel free to pop in some questions. For those of you watching live, thank you. There's a few more of you that have dropped in, but we're gonna kick off as always just with a couple of stories that have caught our eye.
Okay.
So we don't want to change format too much, but I think these are more, these are kind of more, let's say, fun stories. I kind of picked up, which is very unusual for me. For everyone that knows, I'm not really into my soccer. I call it soccer. There we go, as opposed to football, just because it angers Amit. But this signing of obviously Lionel Messi over at PSG. I was just looking at it from a kind of business perspective, and I'm not sure if this caught your eye, Amit, but there was some wild kind of numbers being floated out there, right? One number was like PSG gained 23 million followers on Instagram in 24 hours, and they sold $1 billion worth of merchandise in that 1 hour. And I managed to track down the real numbers. The real numbers, they gained 3 million followers on Instagram, which quite frankly is not something to be upset about. And then from a kind of jerseys, they sold 150,000 shirts in 7 minutes. And there was video on their kind of in Twitter, just there's a main shop apparently in the Champs-Elysees, where the PSG shop is, and the queue is just ludicrous, right? People buying shirts. So I think when obviously most people are thinking about this move, Lionel Messi to PSG, from a football perspective, I've just looked at it from a revenue perspective, and the money that he's going to generate hopefully will cover his million pound or dollar wage check, weekly wage packet. I just wonder what you thought, because obviously you live in that sporting world more than I do, and how that impacts business. And have you seen it before with any kind of players?
No, I think it's very rare that you get a player that ultimately earns so much money. Yeah, it costs the club nothing because they basically cover it with additional revenue. His Barcelona contract was about $627 million over 4 years, his last Barcelona contract. So when you're talking about that $1 million a week, triple it, and that's what he was on at Barcelona.
Right.
Barcelona came out last night, funnily enough. By the way, I find this massively weird that me and you are talking about football. But anyway, Just doesn't happen. Barcelona came out last night and said that they're 1.15 billion dollars, maybe euros in debt, which is scary in itself for a football club. I mean, they've got all sorts of issues, and that's the reason why they had to let Messi go, because they couldn't even pay him nothing, and they'd still be breaking the financial fair play rules in Spain.
Right. Okay.
And so they're just in loads of trouble. But you're talking about a business that's $1.15 billion in debt that's now just lost. Well, they said, essentially the $600 million that they paid him in his last contract over the last 4 years, was essentially covered by additional revenue because of him. So you imagine now they've lost the best part of $150 million a year for the next 4 years, potentially, on the back of Messi not playing for them. Although what was quite funny is, again, most of the fans turned up at the game over the weekend in Messi shirts, and again, I don't know whether there's perhaps going to be a lot of people saying, listen, we can't really keep doing that. We need maybe find a current player, especially if he plays against them in the Champions League and scores a few goals past them. I mean, but anyway, super interesting. But I think it's mind blowing, because you don't see that. Maybe there's two players in the world that could do that, and one's Ronaldo and one's Messi, and that's it.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Just blew me away. I guess they can't even start a Barcelona retro line of Messi shirts, because obviously they don't. I guess it's illegal now to kind of be associated to him, possibly.
What's about that? Yeah, I mean, there'll be something there. Messi's got some smart lawyers behind him.
Yeah.
Who've kept him out of jail for tax fraud and stuff. I won't get to that.
So look, I'm hogging the news stories this week because I've only got a couple. The other thing that interested me that popped up is baristas. And going back to customer happiness on our last show, and the customer's always happy, customer is always right. I remember back in my early days when I was flipping burgers at McDonald's, there was a sign at the back that said 2 rules at McDonald's. Number 1 rule is customer is always right. Number 2 rule, if the customer is wrong, refer to rule number 1. Which I thought was pretty cool. But this is a story that came out of the US, where baristas in Starbucks are just getting tired of these insane personalized coffees. So for those of you who don't know, these are people that are asking for things like getting brownies blended in their lattes. They bring their own ingredients and say, hey, listen, can you add this in? And effectively, at the moment, Starbucks, there is no limit, right? So you can kind of request whatever you want. So I just wondered how you felt about how far do you move away from the actual brand, which is essentially like coffee, to something that's, a Frankenstein, and you're relying on your staff, your team to kind of execute on that. I just wonder what you thought.
Yeah, I kind of refer back to something that still upsets me, which is when KFC started doing spicy chicken.
Yeah,
which is definitely not part of Colonel Sanders's original recipe, right? Which is what we all grew up on, because those were the ads, right? It was like you go there for that original recipe and you rock up and now they do spicy chicken. You're like, oh, that's not right. Look, these guys have perfected their kind of art, and then you get people coming in and butchering it. I mean, it's no, I can see where there's frustrations, but yeah, I mean, if it gets out of control, it becomes silly, right? I mean, it's the point.
Yeah, exactly.
And we live in a world where people are going to then suddenly write reviews and say that I went in and asked for my, egg and brownie blended latte, and it just wasn't as good as it was last time. Well, what do you expect? I mean, but that's the world we live in, right? So you open yourself up for criticism, trying to be more helpful, and I've seen that so many times as well. So yeah, interesting story.
Yeah, true.
Cool.
Okay. So
Andrew, I'm really conscious that we've thanks to everyone who's just joined in the last few minutes, but we basically we set this show up when we were planning it. When we were planning it, we were saying, right, that's fine, we'll just build out a strategy. And actually, when we were like, well, why don't we just build out 2 strategies? And then we kind of, in our excitement, just agreed and went ahead. But typically, what we're going to be showing you today is going to be a little bit faster paced than we would normally kind of do what we're going to do. We normally spend, I'd say, between 2 to 3 hours per strategy, just obviously to make sure. And that's when me and you are doing it, right? With sort of 20 odd years experience behind us. But I think it'll be fun. I think the idea here today, guys, is that we've been approached by 2 people who basically came to know us, I think, through this show. They contacted us and said, "Look, we've got some we've got a startup." Two very independent conversations. One was from the travel industry, and one was from the real estate sector. Both funded startups, and they're at that point. I think they're going to go to market. I think within the next sort of 3 months. They're happy for us to talk about them today because I think they're at that stage of quite confident in terms of what they've got. And yeah, so basically what they, we've had an initial session with them just to understand more about their business. And then we kind of asked them if they were happy for us to maybe build out that kind of go-to-market, initial kind of launch strategy for them live on air today. So, so again, we kind of thought about how we can do this. We realized we have quite a few hundred podcast listeners, so we apologize to them in advance because this is going to be quite a visual show. But we will leave the links and our show notes and stuff like that to the podcast, so that if you are listening while driving or whatever you do, you can always just have a quick look at a traffic light or something. Just to kind of get a feel for it.
We're still going to be essentially explaining what we're doing, but obviously for those of you that are watching, it's just a bit of a visual reference. So mind mapping is something that we use quite a lot, either for kind of breakout sessions in real time like this, or presentation to clients as well. And I think the thing is that both these clients realize that this is done at speed for this particular purpose, but it's not like a one-off. So they're that's why they're happy to kind of run through. So shall I share my screen, Emmett, and
absolutely
take control of the wheel, as it were?
Absolutely. Let's go for it.
To get into this. So basically, guys, just actually a bit of a hack. So we use something called Mindmap to kind of create these mind maps. Kind of great, very, there are some others players on the market, but this is the one that we kind of find that works quite well. So I think first and foremost, Amit, I think, shall we look at, for us, it's all about essentially, who the addressable audience is, right? So do we want to explain briefly about Better Book first?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let me do that while you're setting up. But basically, so Better Book is a company which is about to be launched, I think initially for the UAE market. But essentially, they've looked at the travel industry, they've looked at online travel agencies, and they found a gap. And actually, it's interesting. I think when me and Andrew first spoke to the owner, it's a really almost obvious gap, but it's one that I think has just become more apparent on the back of COVID. So it's one of those businesses which I think has just really kind of reached a higher level of appeal since last year. And the whole kind of idea behind it, because their idea is very much that we're not Booking.com, we're not Expedia, we're not hotels.com. And we're not TripAdvisor from a kind of reviews perspective, but who we are is something that's very kind of unique. And the kind of gap that they found in the market, they've had this justified now by speaking to major hotel groups, independent hotels, is that they want to offer additional value for room bookers. Okay, and what they said, and I found this really interesting. I think we've spoken about this before as well, Andrew. But what tends to happen at times when times are potentially tough, people are out there searching for more value, right? And a lot of brands mistake value for discount. And the challenge with discounts is it's not sustainable, right? So the first thing you're doing as a brand by discounting is devaluing your product potentially. When you do that on a wider scale, it becomes very difficult for you to then re-raise those prices, right? So the second someone knows that they can buy something for 50% less, why would they then ever? And this is almost goes back to the early kind of Groupon days and stuff like that. But why would they then ever pay 100% for that product, right? And so we kind of had that kind of discussion with this client, and we said, look, yeah, we like it. I think, value-focused businesses, I think today are really the ones that are going to build more intrinsic value. They're going to have more loyalty, and ultimately, I feel as if they're going to have more success. And this is essentially an online travel agency where if you're booking a hotel room, they're going to give you a percentage of your room rate back in the form of credit, and that credit can then be used across the hotel. whether it's in the spa, whether it's in a restaurant or wherever it is, right? So wherever you would typically spend money inside of a hotel, if you spend say $200 in the hotel for your room, sorry, you can get anywhere between say 50 and 100% of that money back in spend within the hotel. And it works for a hotel because obviously they're operating at margin, so those $200 that they're giving back potentially isn't costing them $200. But it's also a great differentiator for them, right? So, they're adding value back. They're getting people to spend more time inside of our hotel, experience more of our services, which potentially should build more loyalty, as opposed to just saying, look, instead of $200 a night, my rooms are at $100 a night. And I think this kind of model has a lot of kind of room, right? Do you feel as if I've covered it? The owner of that business is watching. So if I have butchered that, then feel free to let us know in the chat. But I think I've covered most of it, Andrew. Right? Is there anything that I feel
all good in the hood?
Yeah, okay.
I think we can crack on with kind of how we go about
let's do it.
So I've just kind of, while you've been doing that, I've just kind of shared, some of the kind of breakout nodes that we look at. So, first and foremost, obviously what we're looking at is kind of who's this aimed at, right? So, I mean, I think persona wise, obviously we mentioned there who this is, and it breaks down essentially the audience. So sometimes it's persona, sometimes it's audience. If it's a B2B engagement, that would be, client or customer, but essentially, obviously, the same thing, right? So who is this designed for, right? We can jump into what those are. So, I mean, I think when we look at this, what are we kind of looking at here from this first piece? I mean, so you touched upon it there, Amit. So I think we can kind of jump in, and I'll just type while we kind of go through.
Yeah, sure. So I think first and foremost, we're looking at groups. I think we've all been there where we've traveled in groups, and then things like restaurant bills come up and it gets a bit awkward, or bar bills come up and it gets a bit awkward. The fact that you've got credit, essentially free money to spend, I think it helps. So I think groups is a good audience for this. Families, obviously, I think one of the other ones that we discussed was B2B. Okay. So solo travelers for sure, and then the corporate travelers, right? Your B2B corporate travelers. So the guys that are kind of doing business trips. There's not been a lot of that, obviously, the last 18 months ago, but we've already seen signs of that picking up as well.
I think just one thing before we touch on this, Amit, as well. With these guys with Better Book, they do have, like most organizations, two sides of the coin. And what we're focusing on now through this, for purpose of time, is who they want to attract to use the application to engage with them as customers. What we also are engaged with them is how they coordinate and communicate to their partners. Okay, so that's a completely different audience, right? So the hotels that are listed on the actual application itself, that is a whole other set of strategy, right? Very different, but obviously, for the purpose of time, we're going to run through who this is aimed at. Sorry, B2B and it was corporate.
Obviously, we're talking about the launch strategy side from a consumer perspective. Exactly. But right. So B2B, and again, B2B becomes interesting especially with corporate travel, because typically when business people are traveling, there might be some kind of limitations in terms of you can only spend money or expense money that you spend in a restaurant, but not a bar or whatever it is, right? You can't potentially put a massage on your expense sheet at the back, after a business trip. Whereas with if they book through Better Book, potentially they got the freedom to pay a normal room rate, and then essentially have a massage, maybe have a drink, and then obviously there's no need to kind of expense any of that because it's included within the credit. So I think that works. So
I think it's worth, obviously, at this point as well, to explaining a bit, because we jumped into this, like why. Why do we have to break out these different audiences, right? And I think that we have to understand here now that we live in a very B to me or C to me world, right? Most people who want to be treated as individuals. They want you to communicate with them as a brand on their level, in their language, and they want to identify with that particular brand. So this is why we look at breaking out those different personas, because essentially the journeys that those personas take through your brand will differ. right? From, you know, discovery, from kind of delight, engagement, whatever. This is why we break out these different personas, because essentially we're going to be marketing to these individuals separately and potentially selling to them separately as well, right? And it goes without saying, you know, the approach to kind of the corporate travel guys versus the families is going to be a different approach. That's why. So from content, from you know, just advertising, from marketing, etc., all is different, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's using all of that data, like what you said, just to get the messaging absolutely right and on point for each sector of the target audience that you're working with.
Exactly.
Yeah, so it makes total sense. Yeah.
So I mean, I think these are the kind of the four strongest groups that obviously came through. As far as, you know, who this is ultimately aimed at. You know, these are obviously the people that are going to be traveling, right? Essentially. So, you know, you're that groups, and then I think the other one as well that we spoke about was couples. So this is also an entire audience in hospitality and travel where couples are focused. So, you know, no kids or had kids and now traveling alone, or whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah, there was one other area as well, which I'm not sure if it fits in this section, but it's something that we do need to consider. And if we look at the kind of persona mindsets, when we were sort of presented this business, it just kind of, a couple of things made sense, right? You get a lot of people out there who are staycationing, for example, right now. Yeah. So staycation's the big thing where, you know, people are staying local, and then, you know, essentially having local holidays. Now, this is great, but people are always working within a budget, right? So if you say, right, I've got a budget of X, and I've got, you know, potentially a family of 4, what this product actually allows you to do is kind of look at, maybe if you're, you know, if your budget is a typical kind of 4-star budget, this allows you to start thinking about kind of upscaling a little bit, right? So, you know, do you now look at a 5-star hotel? And the reason why you can kind of afford to do this now is your 4-star would typically just include your room and maybe some breakfast, but then you've still got a budget for lunch and dinner and activities and stuff like that, right? Whereas now, if you can get a 5-star hotel, which perhaps has 75% credit, well, maybe you pay a little bit more, but what you've got is, you know, essentially all of your, you know, your food paid for, perhaps your activities paid for, and you know, it really kind of almost opens up the gate to people kind of upscaling themselves. And again, that's a real drive for brand affinity, right? Because all of a sudden, you know, you're that platform that's now allowed me to do something that I've never been able to do before, you know, for myself or for my family and things like that. So again, it was just more along those lines where, you know, I think this platform kind of thing opens up the door to really kind of people being a little bit more kind of adventurous and pushing the boat out a little bit more as well.
Yeah, I think there's, you know, value-based traveler is different to a budget traveler. This isn't something that, you know, budget travel, this really isn't. There's an opportunity for obtainable luxury, you know, and lifestyle-driven travel and stay effectively. So these obviously bleed into those main groups. So, you know, within the families, you may have that luxury traveler, or you may have that value-based traveler. But each time they value something. So as you said, it's not a discount driven mentality. It's individuals that potentially are willing to pay a bit more, but kind of almost double their rewards by paying a little bit more, let's say. Right. You know, that person that upgrades to the club room, but ultimately the club room gives you breakfast, gives you cocktails, gives you access to a nice lounge, etc. Right. So, you know, that's kind of who we're looking at. So, you know, I think from a persona perspective, obviously, you know, this is something again that we on further sessions, guys, we you know, dive a bit deeper. So what does that family look like, right? You know, and then obviously at that point, you know, where are they geographically based, right? So from a geographical perspective, obviously we mentioned here, you know, they're launching in the UAE to start with, you know, predominantly kind of Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Northern Emirates. So, you know, this is the kind of geo attached to this environment as well. So we use this, you know, the kind of value-based traveler and the geographical environment as an umbrella for all of these different personas, right? That's how it kind of breaks through. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Good. Should we move on to the next section?
Yeah. So then the next one that we kind of tend to blow out is essentially why. Like, why better book, right? So why would I want to, you know, use this this application, this website? why would I want to engage with them versus someone else, right? So this, another way for this is potentially, kind of USPs, right? So I think we're familiar with that language as far as the USP that this has to offer. So that's kind of what we're looking at in this space. And again, if we've identified who we need to target, we've then got to kind of come up with some messaging on why they want to engage with us, right? So this is kind of what's crucial to kind of how that flows through as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, so what do we start with there in terms of maybe the main USP that they've got?
Yeah. So I think the thing is that first and foremost, the main USP is there's nothing else out there like this at the moment, right? And there truly isn't. So I think the thing is, first and foremost is kind of that first to market offering. Okay. So I think once again, it's good. You can see my real-time spelling mistakes. So I love doing this live demo like this, especially when, for those of you who don't know, Amit is the grammar police. So this must be hurting him, me currently doing this. People know Amit. So obviously I think we've got that first to market, the why as far as the USP. So it's a new offering. So I think this kind of pulls into new offering or something different. Okay. And these individuals, they are a market to themselves. So is a whole kind of, persona driven individual that is that person coming out of the cave, making sure they can get some wood for a fire, right? As opposed to kind of hiding in the cave. So I think obviously this is that USP with the new offering and offering something different. This is an opportunity for those people as well. What else?
I think one of the deals that they were talking about that they've got signed up is with a hotel group that's giving them 100% credit for every booking. Yeah. Which essentially is the ability to have like drive incredible value, right? So like higher value than any other platform could possibly offer. So I think you're spending like $150 for the room, you get $150 back to spend in the actual hotel itself. And I think that's that's huge.
I think also obviously one of the things that they're offering is exclusivity. So this isn't where you're going to have, let me just pan back out a bit here and push this one back up and then stand back in. So exclusivity is something that they're offering as well. Exclusivity in the sense that they're cherry picking their partners, and allowing them to do that. I think also the flexibility piece is there as well, Amit.
Yeah.
Amazing. Flexibility. So the flexibility is there. We're allowing people to essentially choose, what the offer is, what they're going to get it back on, where they can spend it,
Correct.
And how they spend it, right? So as you mentioned there, I may want to indulge myself at the spa, or I may want to, kind of just sit at the bar and nail tequilas. So essentially, you kind of, have the flexibility to do whatever you want there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really kind of nice part of the app. We've obviously seen the app, and how it works is if you want to book a different room type. So say, for example, your standard room might give you a 40% credit back, but actually if you upgrade and pay maybe $20 more and get the next room up, you might actually end up getting, say, 70% back, which might even pay for that full upgrade essentially, right? So again, it's I think I think we touched on it a couple of, but the ability to upscale, right? So you're allowing people to do things that they typically wouldn't do, which I think is such an important sort of psychological USP.
Yeah, so there's a discovery piece in there as well, right?
Yeah.
I think the discovery comes into the piece which you was talking there. I just add the word simplicity. So obviously, as you said, you and I have had the luxury of using the application, testing it, kind of seeing how it works, and the guys have really looked at kind of best in class from a kind of apps that are out there and combined all of that into a platform that really is simplistic in its nature. It does what it says on the tin, but it ultimately leads to that discovery piece. So it allows you to kind of play in that space as well. Yeah.
I think we're good here. I think we've got quite a few that we can work with here.
Yeah. So I think this is cool. So obviously we've got that persona piece. We've got the why and USP. Then we kind of look at a bit of a narrative. And the narrative comes in really in a couple of different forms. So the narrative comes from a voice. Don't know why I'm having a bit of a brain freeze on simple words this morning. Anyway, so narrative is the voice or the tone and how you're going to be communicating. So what is that kind of brand character, right?
Yeah.
So the brand character itself. And also, this is a bit of a fluffy word, but I quite like it. You know, the brandscape, right? So the landscape of the brand. How does the brandscape look? What's that narrative? So again, we have to kind of define that narrative in order to communicate the right messaging to those individuals about the right USPs. Okay. So this is obviously important from a narrative perspective, and this also plays into how we communicate with these individuals, right? Be it through the different types of content that we provide to them. How does that work? So from a voice and tonality perspective, you know, almost look at it as a narrative, as the kind of brand personality. Yeah. So for example, if you know, Better Book was a person, how would they behave? How would they speak? Is it more authoritative? Is it more friendly? You know, what is that? And it's important to kind of get this right. And I think a lot of organizations struggle with their narrative. You know, this is something that a lot of clients will come to a summit and, you know, really like, we don't understand, right? This is, you know, our brand, these are our guidelines, but we don't really have a voice. We don't really have the ability to communicate. And obviously this is crucial, right? Anything to add on the narrative?
No, I think you covered it there. Makes total sense. And I think what we would typically do at this point is just really start to test that messaging, right? That piece.
Yeah.
You know, make sure that story is very kind of succinct and what you kind of go to market with in terms of, you know, expressing that in the absolute right way for the brand. So there's a whole lot of work that goes on and up there on that side.
Yeah, I think you touched on it there as well. I mean, the story, you know, this particular company has a great story, right? They've got investors that are involved in tech, investors that are involved in hospitality. They've approached this, again, something that's brand new, not in this space. So the story itself associated to this is something that can be pulled into the narrative, right? As far as how it was founded, why it was founded, obviously very you know, in the now, as far as kind of COVID travel and restrictions and opening up and kind of what that looks like. So I think that's obviously important as well. Yeah. Now, over the last, you know, 6 weeks on the show, we've spoken or touched upon this probably every single show. You know, and throughout the entire growth series, we flash back to this a lot. You know, and that is the funnel, right? You know, and we treat every kind of organization similarly in the way that, you know, how people interact with your brand is through that funnel. So should we touch on the funnel piece, Amit, if we kind of go right at the very top? Yeah.
Okay. All right. So top of funnel. So what are we talking about here? Is this more kind of a go-to-market piece now, or the
Yeah, so what we've got here is we want to break out, essentially, we want to understand, you know, where these individuals are. When we come to actually kind of marketing to the individuals, this is the how at the bottom. So when we look at how we actually going to approach these individuals, right, with this offering, with this story, that's more of a breakdown here. The funnel is kind of understanding, well, okay, potentially where are people, you know, kind of coming in? What's the type of content that we could be sharing with them? Bearing in mind this is an application as well, so I think that adds a different dynamic to the engagement, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So I'd say, obviously, from a top of funnel perspective, you know, essentially, because this is brand new, most of this is going to be top of funnel, right? As far as, you know, kind of what we're doing and how we're kind of promoting this and pushing out there. So I believe there is a web site available as well as the application. But obviously, so when we're looking at the top of funnel on this particular one, we'd be then addressing the platform itself and kind of understanding, you know, usage around that, right? Because again, our strategy from a funnel perspective as pulling people down and nurturing people is going to be different when it associates itself to its app. So for example, when we look at an app, you know, downloads is obviously key, but more important to the application is registration. And then obviously usage, right? usage, and then the gold of all applications, home screen, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean, obviously at the point where you download an application and you move it back to your, prominent screen, the one that perhaps has your phone, WhatsApp, LinkedIn, etc., the most used applications. So from an app perspective, when we're looking at, breaking out this top of funnel, these are some of the considerations that we need to look at, right? So app downloads is one thing, registration, obviously usage, and then home screen as we kind of pull these people down. So this kind of can break out that funnel piece. What about from a web perspective?
Yeah, I think for these guys, for web was very much kind of designed not to replicate the app experience, because I think the app experience is quite unique, but more so to attract new hotels and new partners and stuff like that. Again, much more kind of informative. I think they were going to have some blogs and articles and stuff like that on there as well, from a content piece and videos and those elements. But again, more kind of educational, more informative, as opposed to more conversion driven, I think is the idea.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so if we then break out to that middle piece, I think again we can break this out because obviously app driven and web driven, again similarly previously. So I think from an app perspective, what we're looking at here from a nurturing piece is, so if we're trying to nurture these individuals, we obviously have their email ID, we have their mobile number. So I think obviously, once we determine how these individuals want to be communicated with, we're quite lucky where we have the ability to communicate through email, push, potentially WhatsApp more increasingly, right?
Yeah.
On this piece.
Okay. So what are we doing here? Middle is what you're defining that as where we start communicating with people, or?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think obviously what
we're top of funnel is where we're landing on the app, signing up, sharing content, and sharing information. Sorry, and the next part is basically where the app starts to communicate and drive conversion. Is that what's going on? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're kind of looking at then at that point, how do we move, one of those individuals, obviously from the top of funnel, which is the download and registration, how do we encourage them to actually start using potentially the application at this point, I guess, or just realize it, right? From that piece. So obviously from a communication perspective, we do have these options. So I mean, is this what else would we be looking at this point to nurture those individuals? Are we looking at kind of different types of content and showing people how to use the application, possibly like how-to videos?
Yeah, I think that's definitely part of it. I think the how-to, but it's not just the how-to, but it's for why, right? I think it's for why. Why would you use this? So I think it's a combination of the two. I think the why is potentially more compelling because it's new and it's different. And look, I think we've seen this in the past where there's a lot of apps that get launched and they don't really tell people why they should be using the app, right?
Yeah.
They just kind of say, here's how you use the app. And people are kind of left confused. But we've got to almost kind of break it down and say, look, not everyone's going to get it. And so how do we kind of make that education piece really, really kind of quick and easy to understand? And like videos are ideal for that, right? So it could be, again, that's where you can bring that story piece in. Yeah. So it could be the storytelling from someone who's used the app, potentially TVC on the back of it, where it's kind of, again, just saying, right, like this, I normally stay in a 3-star hotel. This has allowed me to, stay in a 5-star hotel. I've never been able to do that. And guess what? It's cost me the same.
Exactly. Sorry, just while you're doing that, this is misbehavior. So we can use the kind of middle of funnel as the educational piece. I think the thing is, obviously, if we go back to that, top of funnel in most organizations is that moment of discovery, right? Or research. So I think obviously, at that point, someone is either looking for, something like this, or they're discovering it for the first time, right? At that point. So, that kind of piece there is based on there, where versus obviously as middle, we start to communicate with them more, we start to kind of communicate. And I think obviously from the web perspective, as we mentioned, this is that B2B space. So more inclined to use the email communication here. you know, and you know, similar kind of narrative. We won't jump into it because obviously we're looking at the B2C piece, but obviously essentially it's about educating the partners, you know, why they would want to become a partner, right? So you know, what's the benefit to them as far as, you know, captive audience, you know, travelers and guests that want to spend money when they're kind of traveling, etc., right? From there. So if we kind of then pull these individuals down to this environment, Amit, and we say, obviously, okay, cool, you know, we've kind of touched them, you know, from a bottom of funnel perspective, what kind of thing are we looking at from bottom of funnel here?
Yeah, so this is where we're talking about sort of conversion tactics here now, right?
Exactly. How do we convert? So I'm on the app. You know, I'm on the app here. I've decided, you know, I've opened it a few times. What makes me book, essentially, right? What makes me click?
Yeah, I think this is where sort of personalization really comes into play, and this is again where you kind of draw that line between sort of communication at middle and bottom of funnel with the persona, right? So again, if we've got the personas right in terms of, okay, look, these are our audiences. We think it's going to be five or six groups who are predominantly going to be using the app.
Yeah.
We've got to try and understand who these people are as quick as possible, right? And so that can be a part of the registration process. So again, that gets integrated to the top of funnel where we start to understand, or maybe it's within the questions we ask. You know, are you a business traveler? Are you this? Booking.com, for example, do that. So when you start to make a booking or start to inquire, they do ask, are you traveling for business?
Yeah.
But again, you know, if someone's, you know, searching for a room, you know, for two adults and a child, you know, that they're traveling as a family, right? And so again, you don't need people necessarily to start telling you stuff, as long as your tracking capabilities are very kind of firmly in place. You can start to kind of obtain this information. And I think sometimes the information that you obtain from behavior is just infinitely more powerful than what sometimes people are telling you, because sometimes people don't tell you the truth, right? But if you can see actually what their behavior is as a part of that booking process before they've even you know, made a booking or made a purchase or anything like that, you can start to use that data. And I think once you then know that, look, okay, we're now talking to that business traveler, well, I think your messaging then changes, right? So the second you identify that, look, this is someone who's booking in a big city, in a business district, but is booking for one person, you can start to make some assumptions. And based on that, you can start to then personalize some of that messaging, right? So the push notification that this person gets, or the email that they get, the retargeting message through social potentially is very much about, you know, what are the benefits for a business traveler? And we spoke about that earlier, you know, the ability to have, you know, total freedom and flexibility without having to worry about what you can claim back and expense. I think those kinds of things are quite cool. So I
think, so I think essentially then, so what you're saying is, like, from a conversion piece, we should be looking at all of the data that we're collecting, right? So all of the usage data around app usage that's happened kind of top or middle. So I came in on an ad, and we'll talk about that in a minute. I downloaded the app. I didn't open it for 3 days. Then I jumped on because I was going away for a staycation, possibly. You know, I'm learning a bit more about the application. And right at the very beginning, we're kind of then promoting potentially how somebody uses the application or what they see on the application and the different types of deals based on all of that data.
Yes, correct.
Okay, good stuff. And then obviously from a web perspective, again, we're looking at that B2B space. The conversion metric here, obviously, I think also is data driven, right? So we're able to determine who is interested in the content that we're sharing. You know, we can look to score these individuals as well. We've spoken about scoring, you know, opportunities in the past. So I think obviously that's something that we can pull into the web piece as well, right? From a conversion aspect for partners.
Yeah, absolutely. I look for both of these. I think, especially when you get to bottom of funnel, I think this is where marketing automation and things like that really play a kind of significant role. You know, the reality is that if this company is going to be successful, they're going to have to have thousands of conversations simultaneously, right? So if you've got, you know, thousands of people on the app, all browsing, looking for rooms, you've got to make sure that personalization machine is kind of working and in place. And so, you know, it comes down to tracking. It comes down to then making sure that you're not just tracking, but being able to action based on some of those tracking triggers, right? So,
Yeah.
and I think that works from a kind of B2B and B2C perspective, because suddenly if you've got the best hotel in your country, really kind of seriously considering this and browsing it, you need to know their behavior, right? You need to know, how invested are they in the research process?
Yeah.
You need to know, and obviously that drives the scoring. But you don't want to miss those kind of sales opportunities there as well.
No, and look, I think also in the app, all of this activity is potentially that FOMO stuff as well. So to encourage some sort of conversion or urgency associated to that, the fear of missing out, and we see those tactics in this space quite a lot. You're probably familiar with it, when you see this many people are looking at this hotel, this person's just booked this hotel. So there's that element as well to create some sense of urgency associated to the application. Because look, I think one thing we haven't kind of touched on this again, because this is very high level. As you mentioned, we're trying to condense activity within a 45-minute space, which, by the way, we've massively failed on, because there's no way we're going to do another brand in 8 minutes. But one thing that we should say is we always look at what are the roadblocks, right? For this as well. So it's not just all, sweet roses and flowers. It's kind of, what are those potential roadblocks, right? The likes of, okay, for example, why would I have, an app like Better Book on my homepage, right? On my home screen. It's something I'm using occasionally. How can we encourage people to come back to the application, right? Why would I want to use it? So one of the things that we look at is obviously that roadblock as well. So it's something we hadn't touched in here, but it's always important to mention, Amit, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we when we're talking about roadblocks, we're always, with technology, we're always at the mercy of technology providers, right?
Yeah.
So say, for example, if Apple suddenly update their location settings, options that are available to kind of developers, that may have a significant kind of impact with this, right? Because we're very dependent here with this application in terms of some of the marketing and some of the messaging to really reach a local audience. Because we're trying to encourage, okay, look, instead of going out for a meal on a Thursday night, that's going to maybe cost you, in the UAE, say 500 dirhams.
Yeah.
Well, what if you could actually book a room and get 500 dirhams credit?
Yeah.
So you're basically, getting a free night stay with that meal. I mean, this is the kind of things that we're trying to encourage, for that client, right? To really kind of drive impulse purchases, take advantage of, last minute, occupancy volumes in terms of what's available capacity wise.
Yeah.
And again, we're at the mercy of third parties essentially, in terms of what data we can access and when we can access it. So I think one of the things I think that we're definitely suggesting for these guys is collect as much first party data as possible.
Yeah. Exactly.
So rather than relying on push notifications based on location, is there something else that we could do, right? Is there another way of collecting that information, storing that within a system, which then automates communication on the back of it?
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's important. That first party data is crucial, as you said. I mean, we've spoken about the security perspective in the past, on this, and we've had a look at, obviously, I think the last stat we had was less than 5% of people are allowing people to track their activity across Apple devices. So that becomes even more important when you, as a brand, can collect your own data. Going back to, sign up when you're signing up to the application, try to find out what you're using it for the purpose. Even when you start to book, and obviously booking.com does a great job of this, as kind of post-stay, write a review, tell me a bit more about your experience. And they're only collecting data. Yes, they're making it nice for people to read a review, but they're collecting data, right?
Yeah.
So I guess what we have is we have 4 minutes to talk about how, Mr. Amit. So I think at this point, I think we can kind of break this out into kind of a few different areas. So I've thrown in the word content here. Ultimately, the only way we're going to be able to communicate this message across any individuals is through content, right?
Yeah. Okay. So I think go ahead and add whatever you want to add now. I'll talk about it, I think, while we're doing this, just to save a bit of time. But But I think typically what we would do is we'd want people to, or would want this brand to think about things in a slightly longer term perspective. And content really plays a kind of big role in that. So if for example, we've got a really kind of strong content base, that kind of breeds things like virality, where people can potentially start sharing that content. It helps from a search perspective. So really good written content gives you almost like sustainable SEO opportunities. Views or reviews, as what it's more commonly known, gives you an opportunity to really talk about how people are kind of engaging and behaving with your brand in terms of the experience they're having, and it's really kind of creating, I think, a lot of strategic content, right? I mean, I think, Andrew, if you scroll up a little, you've got things like animated videos, and you've got videos and stuff like that in there. You don't want to just create these for the sake of creating these. You want to create these to serve a real purpose, and I think part of that is to really kind of make sure that you understand the role that each type of content you play, what it has, right? Blog articles, for example, I think when we spoke to these guys, we said, have you got a kind of blog strategy? And they were like, not really. And we were like, so do you have almost like, do you have literally 100 million to spend on advertising in that first year? Because unless you do have, an organic approach to your strategy, you're never going to be able to outspend Expedia and Booking.com, right? These guys are the two top spenders on Google. So you do need an alternative strategy there that's looking at maybe long tail keywords and really kind of value-based stuff, because otherwise you're just going to get swallowed up alive. So I think that becomes a part of it. And obviously when we're looking at things like Google, I think what Andrew's obviously put there is organic and paid. And again, organic, we're talking very much where it's linked to the content side of it and SEO. The paid is obviously where we're looking at low hanging fruit, right? So if someone is searching for the best value hotel deals, that's someone that we want to kind of speak to, right? If someone's looking for potentially the cheapest hotel deals, well, we may want to speak to them, but the messaging might be slightly different, where we want to kind of educate them. But again, the content we show them is going to be very much related to that educational content, trying to kind of get people to understand that sometimes discounts aren't the cheapest way of doing things. If you're paying 200 and getting 200 back, you're going to be much better off than getting a 25% discount, right? And so that education piece, I think, becomes really, really interesting. And then Andrew, from a social perspective, do you want to kind of talk on that then while you're typing that?
Yeah,
let's see if you can multitask.
The socials are really based on what is it? You can't breathe and something at the same time, or you can't hum and breathe through your nose or something. I saw that on TikTok the other day. So basically, let me just try and drag these out beforehand. From a social perspective, everything is really driven on that persona. And the reason why is because that's where these individuals live. So if we want to target, for example, the family space, it may be that Facebook and Instagram. If we want to target kind of a younger audience in couples, something like that, it may be Snap. But also a lot of the time, this is driven by content as well. So more increasingly now, things like TikTok and Reels on Instagram, which would resonate, kind of well on here. You have to create bespoke content. So previously on social, you would use one piece of content and redistribute that across the other social channels. Now that's something that doesn't really kind of work. And also there are social spaces that are dedicated to particular countries, for example. So when we look at Russia, for example, it might be something like VK, which is a social platform similar to search here. It may be Yandex versus Google, right? If we're going after the Russian market. In addition to that, if we're going after the Asian market, specifically China, it's WeChat and Weibo and it's other social platforms. So all of it is really driven by persona and audience and how we can reach those individuals from a social perspective. And socials again are broken out by paid and organic. Of those platforms, TikTok really only appears to be the one now where you can get an organic lift off of particular posting, but most of it is paid. So all of these environments are business essentially, and they're obviously generating revenue from ad spend. So again, it's about amplifying the content you're creating on here as well.
I think LinkedIn plays a role here as well. We're talking about that corporate traveler potentially, and also families, right? So So again, different messaging for different kind of demographic subgroups. Very simple level. If you want to target regional, guys who are traveling for business on a regional level, target regional directors, right?
Yes.
Just make sure these guys are kind of have visibility for your brand, because again, you may be able to kind of influence behavioral change, which I think is what we're trying to do here.
Exactly. Yeah, I think one thing we should just touch upon here, actually, which also forms part of this, is maps. So maps, a lot of people are using maps. So Google Map advertising could be used if you're having particular brands or search. So if somebody's looking for a particular partner hotel, that's something that we would do. And then also, this is not so much a mechanism, but direct to WhatsApp. So sometimes if we want to direct a conversation from a brand, especially if it's a brand that's new to market, we may want to direct people to their customer service first and foremost, right? A part of that conversation, that alliance. And then lastly, I know we've overrun here a bit, but I think it's important to look at the App Store piece as well. So obviously App Store and the Play Store from a Google environment, but there is the ability to, affect your ranking within search in here as well. So organically, obviously, this is more based on organically. It's based on me not being able to spell, but it's based on essentially kind of keywords that you're using within your bio. And then obviously from a paid perspective, you have the ability to run ads within the app and Play Store based on what people are searching for as well, right? So obviously this is something that forms part of the strategy as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's important, especially in a space like this where you've got so many people downloading Booking.com, Expedia, Hotel.com apps, TripAdvisor. I mean, these are all potential searches on the App Store that you can intercept. I think what's interesting now is this is also where you can be clever and use a website as well, right? So again, driving people to that specific download page, as opposed to getting them to search for it where they get distracted. I think is definitely a strategy that needs to be kind of looked at here.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, excellent. So guys, we were obviously clearly too ambitious, in our activity. So we're going to have to call it quits. But essentially, obviously, as you can see here, this is, in real time, or let's say real time on steroids, how we would kind of break out, a mind map, and effectively we would then dissect each one of these, and then we would apply different levels of activity as to it. So for example, we've looked at understandably the type of content that we have and what's on here, but at that point, we need to know, well, okay, we know that content that's on here, but how are we going to make sure that people engage with that content? So just because we've created these beautiful videos or these phenomenal emails, how are we actually going to do it? So this is still very much the initial piece. And I'm actually surprised we burned through. But obviously, I think for those of you that are listening, obviously, we can share this, as Amit mentioned. For those of you that are watching, we hope it's kind of giving you an insight or behind the curtain of Wizard of Oz. I was going to wear some red shoes today, and I thought I might get called Dorothy, so that's why Wizard of Oz is in my head. But I think, Amit, before we kind of wave goodbye, I'm so super happy that we've had people that have stayed the entire time. So thank you guys, really appreciate that. I can see people that jumped in straight at the beginning and are kind of still here at the end. So wonderful. So Amit, anything to add before we kind of let people go?
No, I look, apologies. We've not obviously got through to the real estate one, which potentially is a bigger project than this one. So so we were super ambitious. But yeah, look, I think it was a good session. I think there's just so much complexity, and I think the point is we didn't even get to the point where we start drawing lines between each of those nodes and stuff like that, where it starts to kind of make sense in a kind of more holistic way. But look, I hope you guys kind of enjoyed that and found that useful. If you've got any comments or anything, please feel free to share those. Reply to the emails that you guys get. Those come directly to us, by the way. So I think that's it, Andrew. And we're not back next week now, so we're We're on a kind of hiatus for a week, and then we kick off back again, I think end of August or beginning of September now, I guess.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. I think it's 29th of August, I think, just for the end of September. Or yeah, 29th, I think.
31st, sorry. 31st is the next one.
31st. Okay, 31st next one. Yeah, sorry, I was thinking Sunday, not Tuesday. Yeah, so 31st. So yeah, looking forward to that. But thank you again, everyone that took the time to watch us, listen to us. We'll be back, as Amit mentioned, there in a couple of weeks. So stay safe, everyone. Catch you then. See you, Amit.
Take care. Thanks, Andrew.